Testing, okay. Now our main speaker will share his experience, strength, and hope with us. Please join me in welcoming Jason.
Hey everybody, my name is Jason Biddick. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is January 15th, 2013. I have a home group, that's the Bellflower Big Book group. I have a sponsor, I have commitments in every single one of the meetings that I go to. Thank you guys so much for the invitation to come out here and talk to you guys today. Congratulations to the birthday folks. That's a big deal. And welcome to the newcomers, especially all the guys that we brought up here tonight. We got like 8 of us. And Taylor, thank you for doing 10 minutes. A couple of things about Taylor. One is, coincidentally, we actually both went to the same high school in Anaheim, which is nice. And the other thing is, we're both actually the same age. I just drank a lot more than he did, and it just did they look like they believe me? No? Yeah? No? Anyways, and if you're new, it's my job tonight just to share in a general way what it used to be like, what happened, and what it's like now. My sponsor used to take it a step further. He said, Jason, you're supposed to do 2 things. One is you're supposed to comfort the afflicted, and secondly, you're supposed to afflict the comfortable. And so if you feel like you're in this room tonight and you are dying of alcoholism and you're trying to decide whether or not to go to another meeting or put a gun in your mouth, I hope by the end of this meeting I give you a reason to maybe come back tomorrow. In that same respect, if you're sitting in these chairs and you've been around for a long time and you're not sponsoring anybody and not really practicing the 12 steps, I hope you leave here having to talk to your sponsor about a resentment you might have against me as well. Either way, I'm not going to be overly concerned. So I'm just going to go ahead and just jump right into it. I grew up in Orange County, as I kind of mentioned, where Taylor and I went to school. Had a very normal childhood. The older I get, the more normal it seems. Both my mom and my dad both graduated from college. My dad owned a couple of small businesses and did just well enough where my mom could stay home with us. I had a younger brother, younger sister. Every season there was a different sport, like we had Little League, and then we had AYSO soccer, and it just seemed like, my mom, in one of those old station wagons, was always driving us around from sport to sport to sport. And I think one of the reasons they did that with me is because I just always had an absolute ton of energy. And even in elementary school, they would say that they'd take me to the doctor and they'd tell me that I had ADD. And for a little while, they gave me Ritalin and, some of the things that they used to do for kids back then. All really Ritalin did for me was, instead of not doing homework, I just did not do homework faster. Is basically exactly the effect that Ritalin had on me. As I got into junior high school, I was never really too concerned with the things that were going on with my family. I only wanted to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. Most kids are pretty selfish and self-centered. I think I kind of took it to another level. I mean, if you were to ask me about my family, I would have told you that I didn't have a younger brother and sister. I wanted to be the center of attention. Being the firstborn, it always seemed kind of natural for me, and I was a pretty good athlete growing up as well. And then in junior high school, I remember going on a family trip, and it was down in Carlsbad by the ocean. And my parents went out on a boat with a bunch of the other parents, and I went and played some football with a bunch of the Marines. And when we were done playing football, I followed them back into a hotel room, and there was a bar in that hotel room. And I remember it to this day. And one of them just said, "Look, if you want to drink, kid, it's on you." And I remember walking over there, and it was like Southern Comfort and some kind of drink mix. I'm not totally sure what it was, but I went back and I found a chair in the corner and I just sat down and I started drinking it. And I'm telling you, it was the best 15 minutes of my life. I look back on that and I could tell you where the sun was in the sky. I could tell you about the upholstery in the chair. It was fantastic. The only way I could describe it, it was my very first spiritual experience. And as I was about halfway through that second drink, my body decided that it shouldn't have that inside of me anymore, and I threw up, and I ended up going back to the hotel room and passing out. And I didn't get in any trouble, but from the very beginning, I love the effect produced by alcohol. From the very first time I drank it, I absolutely loved it. I didn't drink because anything else was going on in my life. The reason for my drinking was because I just loved the effect produced by alcohol. Now, obviously, in junior high school, you don't have, at least I didn't have access to alcohol all the time, but any time that I saw it around, I was going to make an effort to go ahead and try to drink it. By the time I was a freshman in high school, I started playing some golf towards 8th grade, and by the time I got into high school as a freshman, I made the high school golf team, and I absolutely loved it because I'd go out there with the seniors. And I made like the varsity team, right? And they would drink and sometimes smoke a little weed, and man, I had felt like I had arrived. It's like, this is the coolest thing ever. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do for a living, but if it can include this kind of stuff, I'd like to do that. I'm not really sure how you can make money doing it, but let's try to drink and play golf all the time. And I would go to parties, and I would always overshoot the mark, and so many times I would end up like on a bathroom floor wrapped around a toilet with your cheek on the tile. And to me, honestly, it just was never that big of a deal. It was just, this is just the price I pay. And you'd lay there for a half hour to 2 hours, and then you'd get up and go drink again and go home. It was just natural. It didn't matter if I threw up, didn't matter how much trouble I got in. I just really loved to drink. By the time I was a senior in high school, I was the best high school golfer in Southern California, LA Times High School Player of the Year, Orange County Register High School Player of the Year, won just about every junior tournament. I qualified for my first PGA Tour event as a high school student, the tour event down at Torrey Pines, and at that time was the youngest participant to ever qualify and play in that tournament. And if you would have asked me at that time, Jason, what does your future look like? Oh boy, I would have told you, man, my future is bright. It's going to be fantastic. Just watch. Just watch. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to be an All-American. After I'm an All-American, I'm going to turn pro. I'm going to make a ton of money. It's going to be fantastic. Now, if you're new, I don't want to spoil the end of the story. That didn't happen. Yeah, no. The fact that you guys have no idea who I am, kind of breaks that narrative. But I went on recruiting trips all around the United States. I could have gone to school anywhere, and I went to a major university here on the West Coast. And my purpose, like I said, was to go and play golf, focus on my studies, and everything was going to be great. But by the first week of school, I don't know what it was. I naturally found some people that drank exactly the way I drank. And this is how my drinking was. By 5 o'clock every day, I had found a guy that drank like I drank, and we would be in his truck with a 12-pack, and we both would drink a 12-pack in an hour. And all that is just one beer every 5 minutes. If you're an analytical thinker like me, I'm a clock drinker, and I always have been a clock drinker, but it's one beer every 5 minutes, and after that, then we're going out, and we're going to have some fun. The third week of school, on a Wednesday, we had broken into an old abandoned building with a couple of girls and a bunch of beer and a Ouija board, and because I've got an idea, right? And within about an hour of getting really drunk and being in there, the police saw that we were in there and we got arrested. And you would think that would be enough, and I'd look at that and go, yeah, I should probably not do this, but that was a Tuesday. Thursday, I was so drunk, and I got pulled over and we got a DUI, and I was kicked out of college before the end of September. I didn't make it a semester. I didn't make it a quarter. Yeah, how about that? But it can't be me. It's got to be the school. It's got to be some circumstance out here. And my parents did exactly what parents in Southern California do when their kids get in trouble drinking, and it's off to rehab. And so as a teenager, I'm coming to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm carrying the big book. And what I learned is I don't get in trouble if I look like this. I'm not telling you guys to do that when you're around your parents, but when I did this, they just thought, look, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. But I would go to the meetings, and I would open up the back cover, and it was blank, and I would grab a pen, and I'd make a really small circle, and then a real small circle. And before you knew it, I was 7 rows deep, and we were saying the Serenity Prayer, and I was out. No sponsor, no steps, no nothing. I didn't understand what alcoholism was. I just thought, this is the price I have to pay to continue living the life that I want to live. I'm not hurting anybody but myself. Let's just keep doing this. And I was able to stay sober for about 8 or 9 months. And like any real alcoholic, I started drinking again. And my parents had learned enough by that first experience with rehab that they would tell me things like, well, you can't stay here anymore, son. And now I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And in my mind, my challenge is that I must have a discipline problem. I can't just stop on my own. Where am I going to learn to go do that? And here I am with, the Ouija idea. My next idea was, let's go join the United States Marine Corps. And that's pretty drastic, but, a young man's got to do what he's got to do. And I'm fine in boot camp, and I'm fine in the School of Infantry. You keep me away from alcohol and put me to work, I'm actually a pretty hard worker. And I was a good Marine until I got out of those and went off to my first duty station. And next thing you know, I'm on the other side of the world. Was in Okinawa for 2 years. And what my life looked like then is I'd be working from 5 in the morning until 2. I would get off at 2 and try to sleep till 6 or 7. And then at 7, I would go out into the bars because I'm a bar drinker. And I would drink all night long and go straight to work. And I'd work from 5 o'clock in the morning until 2, go back to the Marine Corps barracks at 2, work, try to sleep from 2 to 7, and drink all night long. And I started as a class clown in high school, and I became angry and violent by the time I was in the Marine Corps, because now, my head's telling me, why the hell aren't you playing golf every day? Why are you in Japan? Why is your head shaved? Which is cool now, but back then it was just not very cool. And you're paying me $800 a month to do this? This sucks. This really, well, screw this. I'm drinking. I don't care what you guys say. And there's nothing that you can do. I got up to Lance Corporal, which is like an E3, and then, one day, I rolled back into work, and I told my staff sergeant, hey, you know what, I'm not going to work today. I mean, you can do that at Denny's. You can do that at the Waffle House. You cannot do that in the United States Marine Corps. There are repercussions. And it took, about 2 months before I had one of our commanding officers come up to me and say, son, do you think you might have a drinking problem? And I don't know what you hear when you hear that, but I was smart enough to know that they already know. And you have to admit to it. And it's like, yes, sir, I have a drinking problem. And they sent me off to my second rehab. Now I'm 21 years old. And now one more time, I'm sitting in front of a counselor. And what are we talking about? We're talking about triggers and trying to get in touch with your inner child and all this crap that has absolutely nothing to do with recovery from alcoholism. But you know what? I know how to answer all the questions. I know how to fill out a workbook. I know how to people to get off my back. And I walked around with this book, as if somehow this would have something to do with getting the heat off of me. And 3 months later, I get out and I go back to the Marine Corps barracks, and within a week, I'm drinking again, and I can't stop drinking, and I can't figure it out. And I decide on my own that I'm going to go ahead and start taking Antabuse. You should have seen the look on the doctor's face. Usually they give you that as a punishment, and I walked in and said, look, I've heard of this Antabuse stuff. Would you mind if I got a prescription of that? And he's just like, what are you thinking? What am I thinking? What I'm thinking is, if I take this stuff, and I know it will make me violently ill if I drink it, the knowledge of having that in my system, that I will be able to stay sober. No problem. And I took it, and about 10 days into that, I'm in the Marine Corps barracks playing a video game with my roommate, and next thing you know, I've got a gin and juice in my hand, which is what we were drinking back then. And my roommate looks at me, and he looks at me again, and he's like, dude, you need to go look at yourself in the mirror. And I went and looked at myself in the mirror, and it looked like I was getting dressed up for a football game or something, because I had a line down the middle of my face, and half my face was beet purple, and the other was just skin colored. And I took my shirt off, my entire back was completely purple. And I did the only thing that I knew how to do at that time, and that was to immediately stop taking Antabuse, obviously. And I drank right through it. I went out that night because I've got an idea, right? You know how my brain works. It's just, I can't connect the dots. I can't connect the dots. I don't understand alcoholism. I don't understand that I'm fighting against something that I don't have the power to fight against. I have no idea. And within a few months of drinking like that, the Marine Corps let me know that, Jason, you're no longer welcome here, and they sent me home. They kicked me out. They kicked me out early, and I'm back in Yorba Linda in Orange County, and I'm with my parents again. 2 rehabs deep and kicked out of college, and they're just like, Jason, you can stay here, but you have to get sober. And I came back to you guys again, and this time I approached it differently. I got a sponsor. I got a home group. I started to do the work that they asked me to do. And if you're new, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. The good news is, You get sober, you get a sponsor, you jump in the middle of a strong home group like this, and things are going to get better faster. You're going to get a job, place to live, car, maybe even a girlfriend. That's the good news. The bad news is none of those things are the solution to your problem. And I was deep in AA for about 2 or 3 years, and I met a beautiful woman. And we got married. Uh-oh, yeah. And we got married. And then we had my son, Palmer. And then we had my daughter, Peyton. And I started a little insurance agency. And we bought a little house, and which on paper sounds great. But, with each one of those things, it was one less meeting, one less meeting, one less meeting, one less meeting, one less meeting. Until I had convinced myself that I was going to get my spirituality from church on Sunday. People can do that. I have no opinion about church, but the lessons we learn in hindsight, when I look back on my church experience, I was using it as a history lesson. I was going to learn all the people and the stories. It wasn't a relationship building activity like the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous have been for me. And at about 8 years sober, I started to get really, really uncomfortable. I had no idea that it had anything to do with my alcoholism. And the big book tells us if we fail to perfect and enlarge our conscious contact with God through hard work and self-sacrifice, we're not going to survive the certain low spots that we have ahead. And a low spot hit. My dad died of cancer. I wasn't sure exactly what I was supposed to do. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I'm the man of the house. My mom lives close. And I've got my kids and my wife, and I'm put into a position that, as selfish and self-centered as I am, I'm not qualified for, and I get uncomfortable. I get very, very uncomfortable. At about 10 years of sobriety, I'm convinced that the reason that I feel like I do is because my wife doesn't love me the way I deserve to be loved. As bad as that sounds, that is where my head went. And my wife, at the time, she was an elementary school teacher, and then she became an elementary school assistant principal, and then she became a principal. And so she was leaving the house at 6 a.m. to go to school, and she was coming home at 6 or 7 at night. They work hard, and I'm the one that's getting the kids ready, getting them breakfast and getting them to school, and picking them up from school. Right now, as I say that, it sounds amazing. Back then, I was resentful. I was pissed off. My wife would say things like, "Look, we have family time coming up this Saturday." I said, "Look, I've had enough family time this week. I'm done with your family time. You can take the kids. I'm gonna go play." Sounds kind of funny. There's a lot of guilt and shame that comes with being that kind of a father. When you look back on it and realize how deeply selfish and self-centered that is. But that was the type of guy I was. She'd want to go to Disneyland, and I'm telling you, I'm dragging those kids and throwing them on rides as quick as I can because we're home by noon. You know what I'm saying? Boy, what a mess. It was terrible. You know what? And at 13 years of sobriety, I'm walking through an airport, and I sit down in a bar, and a waitress comes over, and I order 2 Budweisers. I didn't even order 1 drink. I ordered 2 after 13 years. And I had those 2 drinks, and man, I needed those drinks. I started hiding drinks around the house. My favorite thing to do was to buy a 12-pack of non-alcoholic beer and dump it out, and then slowly fill it up with Budweiser. And then I put the lid on it, and I'd close the lid on it. And then my wife would be in the kitchen making dinner, and I'd drink a 12-pack of non-alcoholic beer. Yeah, it's hard work drinking the way that I really like to drink. And then there was a bottle of rum in my golf bag, in my room, in one of my shoes. I had stuff hidden all over the place. And either she didn't know, or she just did a great job of just ignoring my insane behavior. But eventually, the thought came that, the reason I'm not happy is because I'm with her and I need to leave her. And I left, and I made her stay. She was from Florida, and she had 6 brothers and sisters back in Florida, and each one of them had 2 kids the same age as my kids. And she wanted to go back there to get help. And I wouldn't let her leave because, damn it, I have rights. And it's not like I'm seeing my kids every week. I'm seeing them once every 2 or 3 weeks. And think about what she had to go through as I fight for my rights. And eventually, there was a sane thought that was like, okay, you can take the kids back there. And I signed over the rights to my kids, and they moved back to Orlando. And I drank for the next 6 months. The house that they were in went into foreclosure. My car was repossessed. I lost that business. I had nothing. I was down to absolutely nothing, and actually I didn't care. My brain was telling me my best days were behind me. I didn't have any friends at this point anyways. Why don't we just keep drinking? And the thought came that, look, why don't you go back to Florida? Why don't you go back to Orlando? Deep down inside that there's a dad in there that used to be a good dad. Let's go back there, and this time it's going to be different. Let's do it. Let's go back there. And I went back there, and I'm telling you, I got a job that I could control when I got there and when I left. I lived about 2 miles from them. My purpose for being there was to be a dad. And if you were to ask me on a Sunday what my week was going to look like, I'd look at you in the eye and I'd say, I promise you this is what it is. I'm going to pick up my daughter Peyton on Tuesday, and I'm going to take her to dance. I'm going to pick up my son on Thursday, and I'm going to take him to Little League. And on Friday, I'm going to pick both of them up. I'm going to take them back to my house. We're going to stay in our pajamas all weekend, and we're going to eat pancakes 3 meals a day and watch cartoons. I swear to God. I swear to God that's what's going to happen. But Tuesday would roll around, and I'm in the bar by 3 o'clock. And I told you I drink by the clock, and I'm looking at the clock, and I got to pick her up at 5, and it's 3 o'clock, and I'm drinking, and I'm drinking, and I'm drinking. And then this phenomenon of craving hits an alcoholic of my type so hard that I'm sending my ex-wife a text and telling her that my damn boss is making me work late. I can't pick up my daughter. And Thursday, I'm sitting in the bar at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm drinking, and I'm looking at the clock, looking at the clock. I got to pick up my son at 5 o'clock to take him to Little League, and just before that, I got to text the ex-wife, because in my thinking, it's like, boy, if I didn't get to see my daughter on Tuesday, it would just be unfair to see my son on Thursday, and so, and also instead of, picking him up this weekend, why don't I just get good and drunk this weekend? Let's just lay one on, and then next week, you know what we're going to do? Yeah, I'm going to pick up my daughter on Tuesday, and I'm going to take her to dance. And I'm going to pick up my son on Thursday. I'm going to take him to Little League. And on Friday, I'm going to pick both of them up. And we're going to put on our pajamas, and I'm going to feed them pancakes 3 meals a day. I swear to God, that's what's going to happen. And I was seeing my kids once every 3 weeks. And I'm telling you, the days that I was able to go and pick them up, I was not with them long. I couldn't be present. I'm looking at the clock, wondering when I have to drop them off, because I need a drink. I absolutely need a drink. And I knew at this point that I had to do something to stop drinking. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I thought for a while that somehow I could drink myself to death. I had stopped paying taxes about 3 or 4 years before that because I was just convinced that I was going to die. So why am I sending money to anybody? I mean, that's just ridiculous. That might be the only sane thought I had during the whole process. Actually, I wouldn't go down to the mailbox, because when I did, the once every 2 or 3 weeks I did, I could barely get the thing open from all the crap that was in there because I don't want your mail. I don't want bills to show up. I'm not looking. I'm not asking anybody for any information. So why the heck am I going to my mailbox? And at that time, I had lost my car for 4 days, and I had gone out drinking, and I don't know if you guys, when you were drinking, that you spent a whole lot of time on social media. I parked my car, and next thing you know, I'm at the bar, and I come out of the bar, and my car's not there, and I got to ride home, and the next day I post on Facebook, "Hey, anybody seen my car?" To me, it's innocent. But some of the responses that I started to get, it's like, is this a red flag? People are texting me, "Hey, is everything okay?" Well, everything's fine. I just don't have my car, which is, to me, was not that big of a deal. So I got to ride back to the bar the next day. As I'm walking into the bar, I'm kind of looking in the parking lot, but it really doesn't matter where my car is now, right? Because I'm where my car would be taking me, which is the bar. And I drink, I think that, once I get up to about the 7 or 8 beer mark, which is just level, I never drank to try to drink myself into oblivion. I drank to just get to that feeling of about 7 or 8 beers. And once I got to that, I just thought that somehow I'd think my way into knowing where my car was. And Well, no, the next day after getting a ride home, I'm texting, okay, day 2, where's my car? And this happened on day 3. And then finally, day 4, one of the bartenders found it at a CVS just right across the street. I'm not a blackout drinker, never was. Doesn't mean I remember anything. But I was parked underneath one of those like 20-minute parkings, like warning you that your car's going to get towed after 20 minutes. What a lie. It was 4 days later that I found it. But, you know, the good news about it, too, is I was like, oh, my God, I forgot I bought a brand new carton of cigarettes. So I had that on the passenger seat as kind of a reward. God, the crap that I had to delete when I got sober so that my kids, when they got older, wouldn't be able to go back and see, you know, the truth of their father's condition. It was a cleanup project, you know, like none other. But I reached a point where I knew I had to stop drinking, and the thought came, maybe I could go back to Alcoholics Anonymous. But it wasn't like when I was 19, you know. I drank all day, and I went to a meeting, you know, and if you're drunk and you're in here, God bless you, you know. And I went home that night, and I drank, you know, and the next day, I drank all day, and I went to a meeting, you know, and then that night, I drank. You know, the big book tells us that for many of us, a definite hospital stay is in order. And I was in that position, that I definitely needed a hospital stay. And I was able to get into a rehab, which, what a great blessing that was. And on the second day of being in that rehab, I walked up to the nurse's station and I said, look, I checked myself in here, right? And the nurse says, well, yes, you have. And I looked at her, I says, I need you to check me out right now. And I'm telling you, this was 13 years ago. You know, I had the beard, the hoodie. I was angry. She was in danger. You know, you need to let me out right now. And she, you know, she backed away and went in and got something signed by the doctor immediately and just said, you can go. And I remember walking to my car and hearing the stones under my feet. And when we talk about the 4 horsemen, terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair, I had just tried Alcoholics Anonymous. It didn't work. I had just tried rehab. It did not work. I just wanted to be free. I didn't even care what that looked like. I just wanted to be free. I don't care if it meant death. I don't care if it meant sobriety. Leave. How do I not live like this? I can't do it anymore. You know, I spent the next 2 months trying to drink myself to death. It is not easy. It's not easy. And finally, I found a 6-story parking structure that, you know I wanted to kill myself, but I didn't know how. And finally, I figured out how I was going to do it. And in the process of going to kill myself, I was detained and arrested and put into a behavioral health facility not of my choosing. Here they call it 5150. There they call it Baker acted. And thank God they did. Thank God they put me into a place I couldn't get out. You know, I remember there was a young man that came into that psych ward after about 4 days, and, you know, we talked about something that he did when he was drinking, and I looked over at him and I said, boy, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. And then some guy back in the corner said, yeah, those that do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. You know, here I am in the psych ward. I could look at you in the eye and recite a portion of chapter 3, a portion of chapter 5. I could have deep discussions about the doctor's opinion and Bill's story. I could tell you about the steps and traditions, and if you want to talk concepts, we could go to it. And I'm in the psych ward. Information is not the solution to my problem. I had this is 26 years after my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm in the psych ward. And I get out after 6 days, and I went to a meeting. And my head, where it wasn't necessarily clear, but it was clear enough. Physically, I was clear enough. And an old-timer, you know, I went out during the break, and I was smoking cigarettes. Yeah, and if you're new, I was smoking cigarettes like it was an Olympic event. I was uncomfortable. I mean, do you get it? I get it. You know, this old timer. I mean, you think people don't know you're a newcomer, right? You did. Yeah, right. Try to hide it. But an old timer came up to me and he said, "Son, when there's an accident victim laying on the side of the road, when do you think the paramedic should start working on him?" And I said, "Well, right then." And he said, "Son, you've been in a terrible accident. We don't get together and start doing some step work. You're going to die." And no greater truth had ever been spoken to me in my entire life. And what I learned was at that moment, I surrendered. And you could tell I surrendered because I looked at that man and I said, "Tell me what to do." I don't care what it is. Tell me what to do. I would have done anything that man said. By about day 18, I was able to get back to California to be around all the people that I had known from Alcoholics Anonymous before. And the first thing my sponsor did was we had a conversation about what led up to this. And the truth is I had began to pursue a false purpose. My purpose became being a good husband and a good father and a good son and a good brother and a good friend and a good business owner. That was my purpose. And that was a false purpose. And when I talked to my sponsor, he said, Jason, I don't know how to show you how to be a good dad or a good son or a good husband or a good brother or a good friend or a good business owner. But what I can do is show you how it is that I built a relationship with God. And through that relationship, and in my experience through that relationship only, do I have an opportunity one day at a time to be all of those things. It had to be hammered into my consciousness that job or no job, wife or no wife, golf or no golf, kids or no kids, bank account or no bank account, I simply cannot stop drinking as long as I put dependence on those things ahead of my dependence on God. And if you are new, I'm here to tell you that if you have nothing right now, if you're sitting here with absolutely nothing right now, you can get sober as long as you're willing just to do a couple of things. One is trusting God. And secondly, with the help of a sponsor, allowing him to show you how to clean house. And that is all you have to do. And when I got into the book with my sponsor this time, I saw that Bill had gone down to the rehabs and he started to share his experience with other alcoholics, and I'd never done that. I had never done that. So immediately at day 19, I would go to a meeting in the morning, I would go to the detoxes in the afternoon to learn how to talk to these guys, and I would go to a meeting at night. As a real alcoholic, I do not have the ability to sit in meetings and drink your coffee and eat your cookies and wait for the rehabs and detoxes and sober livings to bring people to me. I am not a heavy drinker. I'm not a moderate drinker. I'm a real alcoholic that cannot sit here selfishly and wait on that kind of thing. And after I started to go to try to learn how to talk to these people, I didn't know what I was even supposed to say. The first couple of times, all I could do was, what's your name? Where are you from? How many days sober are you? I'm glad you're here. That sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? It was not simple. I promise you. It was the toughest thing I'd ever done in my life. But I'd go back and talk to my sponsor, and he said, Jason, that's all great talking like that, but you need to be able to carry a message of depth and weight. That means you have to take the steps. And I immediately jumped in, and we got the steps done, and I started sponsoring people at about 42, 43 days sober. Do you think that's fast? Let's go back to the big book. Ebby, with just a few days sober, met with Bill, and they talked about their drinking, and they talked about God, and they talked about the steps that he took to find freedom. And Bill, within days, had taken the steps. And then Bill went and talked to Dr. Bob, and they talked about their drinking for a while, and they talked about God, and they talked about the steps that they took to find freedom. And within days of sobriety, Bill was out making amends. And then Bill and Bob, together, with just days of sobriety, went out to AA number 3. And they sat around and they all talked about their drinking. And then they talked about God. And they talked about the steps that they took in order to find freedom. And so when I tell you that I started sponsoring people at like 6 weeks sober, that is slow. If you are new and you have a sponsor that's saying we should go ahead and take our time going through the steps, I would run and hide from anybody that tells you that. I have learned by my experience that just because we have a room full of men and women here does not mean we have a room full of real alcoholics. There are a lot of moderate drinkers and even heavy drinkers that did not need God to get sober. All they needed was circumstances to come to light that will give them the strength to stay sober. And these are the people that are telling you probably to take your time because they don't need God. Could you imagine having cancer and the doctor tells you that you need radiation, but let's wait a bit? No. I'm talking to you out there that are real alcoholics, that tonight you're trying to wonder whether or not put a gun in your mouth or to go to another meeting. I'm telling you that we can get through these steps and we can help you to find God, and we can do it the way the book was set up to do it, and we can do it in a hurry. You know, I can tell you when I was about 3 months sober, you know, I was at a Friday morning meeting. A bunch of these guys go to this Friday morning meeting, and I'm listening to this young man who's about 20 years old, you know, talk about how disappointed in himself he is and how ashamed of himself he is. You know, one of those shares that I'm hearing that, oh my God, this kid's going to drink today. This kid's going to drink today. And I went up to him after the meeting and I said, son, what are you doing today? And he says, I don't know. And I said, well, you're going to spend the day with me. I was twice his size. I was still practicing carrying the message. I'd have carried him if I had to. It wouldn't have been the right thing to do. But he came with me willing, and we went to Denny's. You know, we went to Denny's after the meeting, and I shared with him what it was like being 19 in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, more worried about what I'm wearing and what the girls think than my very soul. We spent all morning talking together, one alcoholic talking to another. We went to another meeting at lunch at the Canyon Club in Laguna. He still wasn't doing that well. He was still upset. It didn't matter, you know, because we were together. We spent all afternoon together, just one alcoholic talking to another. Then that night we looked up in the directory to a meeting, and I had never been to it, and we rolled in there, and there was only like 8 people, you know, like, you know, if everybody doesn't share, we're out of here in about 12 minutes, type, like really small. And by the time it got around to this kid sharing again, he loved his life. He loved his family. He was full of hope. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You know, I turned my head like a dog that heard a dog whistle. It's like, what the hell just happened? And when I dropped that kid off that night, I felt something inside of me that no alcohol, no drug, no bank account, no relationship, no nothing had ever given me. And I knew that you guys were right. I knew that the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was right, and that God was taking care of me, and that all I had to do was to go out and take care of his people. And I started going out to meetings, and as weird as it sounds, I started hunting. Because if you are a real alcoholic and you are uncomfortable, you can see when someone else is uncomfortable. You can see it in their eyes. You can see it the way they stand. You can tell when someone's sitting there and the voices are running, because I have been there. And I go out and I try to talk to them and let them know there's another way. And I'd be honored to show them how it is that we could do that. And we'd go outside and we'd talk about our drinking. And we'd talk about God and the steps that I took to find freedom. At about a year sober, you know, my daughter reaches out and says, hey, why don't you come back to Florida and go to a father-daughter dance with me? You know, one thing I didn't share with you is I was sleeping in a warehouse for 3 months, and I slept in my car for a month as I was going through these steps. The big book tells us we need to work out our solution on the spiritual, and the material will follow, and I understood what that meant. And so I didn't have money for plane tickets and hotels and rental cars, and I told her, boy, baby, I am so grateful that you would allow your father to do that. I don't have the money to come do that, but, you know, my heart began to heal. And a bunch of people from my home group put some miles together and sent me to Florida. She was pulling me around the dance floor by my finger. It's like, this is my dad. Hey, but this is my dad. How do you get from there to here? In my experience, only God can do that. If you are new, and this is your very first visit with us here in Alcoholics Anonymous, or if you are new again, like I was, and have come in and out a few times, there isn't anybody, not your friends, not your family, not your sponsor, not the person sitting next to you. Nobody can look at you with any degree of certainty and tell you what your life is going to be like years from now, or even months from now for that matter. But I promise you this, you get a sponsor, stay in the middle of a wonderful home group like this, and take the 12 steps, your life will be different than it is today. And if you are an alcoholic of my type, anything different is nothing short of a miracle. You have taken a garden variety drunk like me And just like the big book says, you have made me happily and usefully whole again. And for that, I am grateful. Man, I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I love each and every one of you. Thank you, guys.